What's up guys, welcome back to Bass Fishing Declassified. December is right around the corner, and that means it's time for our top 5 baits for December bass fishing. We're gonna have 5 anglers from 5 different regions of the country sharing their top baits for December bass fishing. Let's get into it.
If you live up north and you're lucky enough to have some open water still in the month of December, you can catch a lot of good fish, but you're gonna probably have to fish deeper and super slow. The bait that I'm choosing for December fishing is the Berkley Snap Jig. This bait right here is one of my absolute favorites for really cold water fishing, so much so that a lot of guys like to use it through the ice. The reason for that is this little blade on the bottom, these little wings, when you jig this, whether it's vertical or casting, the bait glides all over the place. So you can get a lot of movement whether you're through the ice or not, but I like to fish this in open water as well. Make a long cast, you snap the rod and that bait just darts and glides all over the place. It does an excellent job at mimicking those bait fish that are starting to die off because your water temperatures are reaching extremely cold temperatures. Most of the fish are going to be keen in on bait fish because the crayfish are in hibernation and the only thing they have left to eat are the bait fish. And most of those fish, like I said, are keying in on that easy meal of a bait fish that's dying. And very few baits do as good of a job as this snap jig. This is really a simple concept. It's just a jig head, and then on the back end, I like to fish some sort of straight-tailed minnow. So this is one of my favorites. This is the Kitech Shad Impact 4-inch. You can see I've got it here. You get a ton of movement out of the tail. So as that bait's gliding around, the tail is not a boot tail because a boot tail will create a lot of drag in the water and therefore prevent the bait from gliding as much as it should. So your straight-tailed, minnow imitating baits are going to be your best. When this hits the bottom, one of the keys to fishing it is give it a little bit of time in these really cold water periods to set on the bottom, because that's what a dying bait fish looks like. A lot of the bass will swim over and suck it up right off of the bottom because they think it's just something that just died and fell to the bottom. The Berkley Snap Jig is a great bait for mimicking that. From a tackle perspective, it kind of depends on what size I'm fishing. They make these all the way up to like 3/4 an ounce, so you can get bigger size ones. Generally speaking, I'm gonna fish it on spinning gear. I'm gonna be throwing either 8 or 10 pound fluorocarbon leaders to a 10-pound braided main line. And like I said, I've got a spinning rod. This is just it's a light medium action rod. This is the NSJ 872 by MHX. It's a custom rod that I built, and I've got it paired up here with a Abu Garcia Revo Rocket spinning reel. I actually like a little bit faster gear ratio reel because that allows me to pick up the line faster every time I snap it. Because when you give this a good snap, you're gonna get a lot of line. Generally speaking, from a location standpoint, I like to look for areas that have some rock or have very steep breaking drop-offs. The key here is if you do have a steep breaking drop-off, when you snap it, that bait will glide down the drop-off really well. And otherwise, if I'm fishing around rock is a great area to fish those wintering bass as well. So give it a try. If you happen to live up here in some areas where you have water temps in that mid 40 degree range or cooler, the Berkley Snap Jig is definitely one of my go-tos.
It is here, y'all, the month of December. For me, this is my favorite time of year to fish, from December to February. There's a time of year you have a chance to go catch big fish and have days where you catch a lot of quality size bass. I'm going to share with y'all my favorite lure I like to throw in the month of December. It is the flat-sided crankbait. Flat-sided crankbait is a crankbait that has this tight wobble, and that tight wobble action is just an action that the bass cannot resist as the temperatures drop during the month of December. The flat-sided crankbait is a crankbait to me that's a versatile lure. It's a lure that I can throw in your shallower depths and then even get down to that 12-foot depth zone as well with the right line and gear. And it's also a lure that I can go throw at a different types of cover. I can go throw this at rock, I can throw it in ditches, I can fish grass, I can fish your long points. It's a lure that can cover a lot of water. For me, in your highland and lowland reservoir lakes, I like to find stained water and throw this lure in stained water, but I'm gonna go target rock, I'm gonna go target wood, stumps. I'm also, with the rock, I'm gonna be looking for rock transitions, I'll be looking for ditches, and I just know this is a lure that can cover a lot of water as I go look at them those areas and them targets for this time of year. If I'm fishing a highland reservoir that has grass, I will throw this in the clear water with the grass. I'll be looking for your grass edges that are them shallower edges that can be in ditches, that can be off them points. Like I said, I will be targeting the shallower grass, so it could be that grass that's anywhere from 4 to that 12-foot depth range. Really, for me, I like to be in that 4 to 8-foot depth range. Go out there and fish this month. There's not as many boats on the water, but there's a lot of big bass to be caught. Like I said, hopefully you just learned something about some flat-sided crankbaits. Go get you a couple and give them a shot.
Today we're going to be talking about my favorite lures and areas to fish in the month of December in the Ozark Lakes. And I love fishing in December. This is the time of year for jerkbaits, and with no surprise, my favorite bait is the jerkbait in the month of December in the Ozark Lakes. This is the Megabass Vision 110. It's the bait that I use most all the time in the month of December, and I'm going to give you guys some good tips and advice on how to catch fish with it here. First of all, here's sort of what happens a little bit different in the month of December and why it's so good for a jerkbait is when those water temperatures start to cool down like into the upper 40s, right around the 50-degree range, you have a transition with the fish. And a lot of the bass, they start to form in these smaller wolf packs, say groups of like 2 to 5, and they get out on these main lake and secondary points, and they suspend out there in and around these points, not just the points too, but also like in the ditches and on steep banks and that type of stuff. And these small wolf packs of bass, there's not a better lure to fish with them than the jerkbait here. So what I'm looking for specifically is the first thing I do is I'm trying to determine the angle of the point that I want to fish. You can pattern these points in the month of December. Sometimes they're on the flatter gravelly type points, sometimes they're on like a 45-degree angle point, sometimes they're on the steeper points. A lot of times you just have to fish them all to tell. One of the things I usually like to do before I start fishing them is I'll graph around these points in anywhere between say 10 to 20 foot of water, and I'm not really looking for fish. I'm just looking for signs of bait fish. If I see bait fish on these points, that's when I'll start keying on those specific points, because I know if there's bait fish there, there's also bass in the area. Now, these are good. The offshore suspended type fish in the month of December with the Vision 110 is good. If you have sort of a day with not much wind, or maybe a day like today where it's sort of like partly cloudy or sunny, those fish will suspend out over that deeper water. But also to remember, guys, one of the most important things is if you get a nasty day, say for example, you get out there and the wind's blowing 15 or 20 miles an hour, it's cloudy, you got a south wind and maybe a falling barometric pressure, those same fish that are schooling up in those little wolf packs on the point ends and sides deeper, they're going to move to the bank. And a lot of times you can just get right on the bank with the Vision 110 and just throw the bait literally in 2 to 3 foot of water and target that 3 to 6 foot zone. If you have wind and clouds, even if that water temperature is 50 degrees, those fish will still get active in that particular situation. Now, as far as techniques on how to fish this, most of the time, or all the time for me, I'm fishing it on a 6 foot 10 inch Megabass spinning rod. I use an 8-pound test Seagar and VizX4 carbon line on it, and I'm not pausing it very much. A lot of people think that you need to pause a suspending jerkbait in the wintertime or December. You don't have to really do that much. If you just let the bait pause for like 1 or 2 seconds, that's plenty. I am targeting the more aggressive fish. Now, the only times that I do let it suspend a long time without moving it is if the water is extremely cold, like around 40 degrees, and if you have some off-colored water where you don't have much visibility where those fish need to hunt it. But most of our Ozark lakes in December, the water's low, the water's really clear, and you can fish these baits a little bit faster than what most people think. One final thing I'll tell you about colors. Colors is completely dependent upon the sunlight in the sky and the light intensity that you have the day out there. In general, use a translucent one like this if it's sunny out, and then if it's sunny or partly cloudy and windy, use a metallic side, and if it's a cloudy day, use a matte finish, like a flat finish is going to work really good. So anyway, guys, Megabass Vision 110, my #1 December bait in the Ozarks. It will get you bit. It will get you bit by numbers and good fish. It's just my favorite way to fish. So see you guys next time.
Really quick, if you guys enjoy the content in this video and want more personalized instruction, head to our website, fishthemoment.com. Then go to the virtual lessons page. Here you can book one-on-one virtual lessons with each member of the Fish the Moment team. In these 1-hour lessons, The Fish Moment team member will break down your lake using Google Earth and a contour line map and answer any questions you have. Whether you're preparing for an upcoming fishing tournament or a fun weekend on the lake, make sure you sign up for one of these one-on-one virtual lessons so you're fully prepared to catch as many fish as possible on the water. Check them out at fishthemoment.com. For my top December bait, I'm going to be talking about a lure you can fish all over the country, from highland reservoirs to lowland reservoirs, blueback herring lakes over in the southeast, and pretty much anywhere you have offshore brush piles. The bait I'm talking about is a Fish the Moment offshore jig, a 5/8 ounce football jig. I love fishing brush piles offshore in December. For whatever reason, big bass just seem to congregate around brush no matter what lake I'm on. If you have brush piles in that 5 to 15 foot range, sometimes even up to 25 feet, you can throw a football jig in those brush piles and catch some big bass. One thing that's interesting about December is that the bass are going to be getting into their wintering areas that they'll spend January, February, and sometimes even March in. But for whatever reason, because the water temperatures haven't gotten quite cold enough yet, they're not going to be acting like they will in January and February. When water temperatures get below the 45-degree mark, bass tend to suspend around brush piles, and you can catch them really well on jerkbaits and Alabama rigs. Really, the bass start keying in on shad in those colder water temperatures, and I find that I don't get that many bites on a jig actually. However, when water temperatures are above that 45-degree range, let's say between 45 and 60 degrees, I can't catch them as well on a shad-imitating lure like a jerkbait or an Alabama rig. Instead, I get a lot more bites on the football jig. Now, the key when fishing a football jig in these brush piles is that you have to get this bait in the very heart of the brush. These fish are not going to be on the edges or the sides, they're going to be right in the dead center. And that's why I designed the Fish the Moment offshore jig to be the most weedless brush pile jig on the market. This jig has a double cable weed guard, which you can adjust by spreading it out, raising it up, and positioning it so that it actually deflects the brush better than a traditional weed guard that just has the small little strands. I actually made a video earlier on Bass Fishing Declassified talking about how I modify this exact jig for offshore bass fishing. So check out that video. We're going to link it right here and down in the description below. I'm going to pair this jig with a Jewel VersaCraw Junior trailer. And the great thing about this trailer is that you can customize it based on the water temperatures. When water temperatures are below 60 degrees, I like to just open the 2 center gates on this trailer to make it more of a chunk style trailer. In the summer, I'll open up all the gates, which gives it a lot more action, but in the winter, you don't want as much action from your trailer. So a standard chunk trailer that just barely moves as you work it over the brush pile is going to be your best bet. My go-to color in this jig is the peanut butter and jelly color. I find that it works great in every single water clarity that I fish, as well as in all different sky conditions, making it very versatile. I'll just pair that with a green pumpkin trailer and I'm good to go. As far as my equipment, I'll be throwing this in a Denali Covert Light 7'2" heavy power fast action bait casting rod. I want a very stout rod that allows me to set the hook hard, drive that hook home with the jig when it's in the middle of a brush pile, and pull those fish away from the brush. I also like to use some pretty stout line, 18-pound Sunline FC Sniper fluorocarbon. This line never fails me when I'm fishing brush, and it is a great investment to get a little bit better fluorocarbon, a little bit heavier line to make sure you don't break off in those brush piles. I also pair that with an Abu Garcia Black Max reel, $50 reel that I got at Walmart like 4 or 5 years ago. I have, I think, 14 of these things, and I've only had one fail on me. So it's a great option for a fishing reel, and it's something that I like to do because I can basically afford to have a lot more setups on the deck of my boat. With these Black Maxes, it's only $50, so I can spend a little bit more money on the actual rod itself. The great thing about these Denali Covert Light rods is that they're only $160, but they're super sensitive and they really allow me to feel my jig when it's down in those brush piles when I'm fishing offshore. A lot of guys that I've actually taken out in the boat fishing with football jigs in the past have struggled to detect bites and even feel their jig with rods that are in that, let's say, $70 to $100 price range. You really do want to invest in a little bit higher quality rod if you're going to be fishing offshore with a football jig, because otherwise you're just going to be missing bites and there's really no point in doing it in the first place. The way you can compensate for the cost is by getting one of these Black Max reels. They cast a mile, they work really well, and they're pretty reliable, so definitely check them out. Also, if you want to get a better price on some of these Denali rods, you can use the promo code FTM2022 when you check out at denalirods.com for a 30% off your first order when you pick up some of these rods. So definitely take advantage of that 30% off code, whether you're getting Christmas presents for a friend or just picking up some rods for yourself. Now let's get to the next angler.
All right, everybody, so it's December, which means one thing: cold weather. You know, the fall time, it was kind of cold and then warm, and water temperatures definitely dropped, but not very fast, and they weren't very consistent drops either. But December is all about cold fronts, cold fronts, cold fronts. It's consistently cold. Those water temperatures are starting to get down to their lowest that they're going to be all season long. And so what happens, especially down here in the south where we've got a lot of shad, is those schools of shad start getting greatly affected by these weather changes. And shad are not very resilient when it comes to cold weather, and especially very severe cold fronts. And oftentimes when the temperatures are getting down into the low 50s and mid 40s, those shad are going to start dying or just getting stunned. And so you want to use baits that imitate those stunned or dying bait fish. And probably the best bait ever created for imitating these stunned or dying shad is a suspending jerkbait. This is an incredible bait for imitating those shad or any type of species that is affected by cold weather. And it's just one of my favorite for consistently catching fish throughout December, especially out here on the TVA. Definitely a go-to out here. And so I'll go through my tackle real quick, and then we'll talk about some of the areas that I like to fish a jerkbait, as well as how to fish it. So first off, let's talk about the tackle. I like to use bait casting gear. The primary reel that I'm going to be using for fishing a jerkbait is going to be a high-speed gear ratio reel. And the reason for this, and we're also going to touch up on this concept for the rod as well, the reason why I like a high-speed gear ratio reel is a lot of times you get surprised by a fish that eats a bait and is coming right at you. Okay, you want to be able to pick up that slack very quickly, so that's why I use an 8-to-1 gear ratio. And as far as the rod is selected for the same exact reason. I use a 7.3 medium action Versa Series rod from Fitzgerald, and a lot of people like to use like 6.5 foot or 7 foot. I used to be one of those guys too. I thought it made a lot of sense to be able to work a jerkbait correctly. You have to have a shorter rod, right? Well, I've found that I actually work these baits better with a longer rod. I've even tried a 7.6 and it works pretty darn good. And I also got tired of hitting the side of the boat, and with a longer rod you tend to do that less. But the main reason I want a longer rod is because when a fish hits and is running to you, you want to be able to pick up that slack, and a longer rod allows you to make that sweeping hook set and get a really good hook set on a hard charging fish. So 7.3 medium action rod. The line is really important for a jerkbait. The basic concept is the heavier the line that you're using, the heavier pound test rating, the less action your jerkbait's going to have, and it's also not going to dive as deep. So to get more depth and more action out of these jerkbaits, you want to lighten up on your line. I always use fluorocarbon for fishing jerkbaits, and I like 10-pound tests. That seems to be my go-to overall, but I will go to heavier line if I'm fishing around real big fish or heavier cover. All right, so let's talk about the areas that you want to fish a jerkbait. Really, some of my favorite places to fish a jerkbait are 45-degree banks and also bluff walls. Anywhere where you have a creek channel snaking its way against the shoreline, where it's a lot steeper and you got a lot of rock, those seem to be the areas where those fish are going to winter. That's where the bait's going to be, and that's where the bass are going to be. And so those are the prime places to throw a jerkbait, is against those steeper walls. Make sure you get the boat real close to the side of the wall and parallel or 45-degree cast, and just slowly work that bait back to the boat. So, and that brings up another key point when it comes to fishing a jerkbait. figure out what the cadence is that the fish want on any particular day. That seems to be the biggest key to fishing a jerkbait, is making sure that you pay attention to, you know, how long of a pause you had on that last cast when you got a bite, how quickly you work that bait, how many jerks to pause ratio. There's a lot of things that go into the cadence overall, but it depends on what those fish want that day. So experiment with the overall cadence, the pauses, how aggressively you work this bait, and if you do that, you're going to be able to get dialed in on a really cool bite. So for December fishing, especially on the TVA, you definitely have to pick up a suspending jerkbait. It's one of my all-time favorites.
And those are our top 5 December baits. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, we'd really appreciate it if you subscribed to the Bass Fishing Declassified YouTube channel so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. Thanks for checking out this one, and we'll see you on the next video.